Welcome. In the spirit of Halloween, I thought I'd read Carrie by Stephen King. Now, I've seen the movie back in the late 70s, but I never ever I never read the book. And Carrie's one of those movies that I saw that really got me into horror. So, Chapter 1, Part 1, Bloodsport. News item from the Westover Weekly Enterprise, August 19th, 1966. Rain of stones reported. It was reliably reported by several persons that the rain of stones fell from the clear sky on Carlin Street in the town of Chamberlain on August 17th. The stones fell principally on the home of Mrs. Margaret White, damaging the roof extensively and ruining 2 gutters and a downspout valued at approximately $25. Mrs. White, a widow, lives with her 3-year-old daughter, Carrietta. Mrs. White could not be reached for comment. Nobody was really surprised when it happened. Not really. Not at the subconscious level where savage things grow. On the surface, all the girls in the shower room were shocked, thrilled, ashamed, or simply glad that the white bitch had taken it in the mouth again. Some of them might also have claimed surprise, but of course their claim was untrue. Carrie had been going to school with some of them since the 1st grade, and this had been building since that time. Building slowly, immutably, in accordance with all the laws that govern human nature. Building with all the steadiness of a chain reaction approaching critical mass. What none of them knew, of course, was that Carrie was telekinetic. Graffiti scratched on the desk on the Baker Street Grammar School in Chamberlain. Carrie White eats shit. The locker room was filled with shouts, echoes, and subterranean sound of showers splashing on tile. The girls had been playing volleyball in period 1, and their morning sweat was light and eager. Girls stretched and writhed under the hot water, squalling, flickering water, squalling white bars of soap from hand to hand. Carrie stood among them, stolidly a frog among swans. She was a chunky girl with pimples on the neck and back, and her wet hair completely without color. It rested against her face and dispirited sogginess, and she simply stood, head slightly bent, letting the water splat against her flesh and roll off. She looked the part of a sacrificial goat, the constant believer in the left-handed monkey wrench's perpetual foul-up, and she was. She wished for and constantly that you and I had individual and thus private showers, like the high schools at Andover or Boxford. They always stared. Showers turned off one by one, girls stepping out, removing pastel bathing caps, towels, spraying deodorant, checking the clock over the door. Bras were hooked, underpants stepped into, steam hung in the air. The place might have been an Egyptian bathhouse except for the constant rumble of the jacuzzi, the whirlpool bath in the corner. Calls and catcalls rebound with all the snap and flicker of a billiard balls after a hard break. So Tommy said he hated hated it on me, and I'm going with my sister and her husband. He picks his nose, but so does she. So they're very shower after school and too cheap to spend a goddamn penny. So Cindy and I, Miss Desjardins, their slim, non-breasted gym teacher, stepped in, craned her neck around briefly, and slapped her hands together. Once smarty. What are you waiting for, Carrie? Doom? There's my Doom. Bell in 5 minutes. Her shorts were blinding white, her legs not too curved, but striking in their unobtrusive masculinity. A silver whistle, won in college archery competition, hung around her neck. The girls giggled and Carrie looked up, her eyes slow and dazed from the heat and the steady pounding roar of the water. Uh-oh. It was a strangely froggy sound, grotesque, apt, and the girls giggled again. Sue Snell had whipped a towel from her, and with the speed of a magician embarking on a wondrous feat, and began to comb rapidly. Miss Desjardins made an irritated, cranking gesture at Carrie and stepped out. Carrie turned off the shower. It died in a drip and a gurgle. It wasn't until she stepped out they all saw the blood running down her leg. From the shadow explode documented facts and specific conclusions derived from the case Carrietta White, by conclusions offered by White and Steams in their paper Telekinesis. A wild talent revisited from that the ability to move objects by effort of the will alone comes to the fore only in moments of extreme personal stress. The talent is well hidden indeed. How else could it have been remained submerged for centuries, with only the tip of the iceberg showing above a sea of quakery? We have only skimpy hearsay evidence upon which to lay our foundation in this case, but even this is enough to indicate that TK potential immense magnitude exists within Carrie White. The great tragedy is now all Monday morning quarterbacks. Period. The caticle came first from Chris Hargensen. It struck the tiled walls, rebounded, struck again. Sue Snell gasped laughter from her nose and felt an odd, vexing mixture of hate, revulsion, exasperation, and pity. She just looked so dumb standing there, not knowing what was going on. God, you think she never... Period. It was becoming a chant, an incantation. Someone in the background perhaps heard it again. Sue couldn't tell. In the jungle of echoes was yelling, "Plug it up!" A hoarse, uninhibited abandon. Period. 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 Carrie stood dumbly in the center of a formed circle, water rolling from her skin in beads. She stood like a patient ox, aware that the joke was on her, as always, dumbly embarrassed, but unsurprised. Sue felt welling disgust as the first drops of the menstrual blood struck the tile in dime-sized drops. "For God's sake, Carrie, you got your period," Sue cried. "Clean yourself up." Uh-oh. She looked around benignly. Her hair struck her cheeks in curving helmet shape. There was a cluster of acne on one shoulder. At 16, the elusive stamp of hurt was already marked clearly in her eyes. Ooh. Next, page 2. Oh, there we go. All right. She thanks there for lipstick, Ruth Grogan suddenly shouted his cryptic glee, and then burst into the shriek of laughter. Sue remembered the comment later and fitted it into a general picture. But now it was only another senseless sound in the confusion. 16, she was thinking. She must know what's happening. She more droplets of blood. Carrie still blinked around at her classmates in slow bewilderment. Helen Shires turned around and made mock throwing up gestures. You're bleeding, Sue yelled suddenly, furiously. You're bleeding, you big dumb pudding. Carrie looked down at herself. She shrieked. The sound was very loud in the humid locker room. A tampon suddenly struck her in the chest and fell with a plop at her feet. A red flower stained the absorbent cotton and spread. Then the laughter, disgust, contemptuous, horrified, seemed to rise and bloom into something jagged and ugly. The girls were bombarding her with tampons and sanitary napkins, some from the purses and some from the broken dispenser on the wall. They flew like snow, and a chant became, "Plug it up, plug it up, plug it up." Sue was throwing them too, throwing and chanting with the rest, not really sure what she was doing. A charm had occurred to her mind, and it glowed there like neon. There was no harm in it really. No harm in it really. No harm in it was still flashing and glowing, reassuring, when Carrie suddenly began to howl and back away, flailing her arms and grunting and gobbing. The girls stooped, realized that fission and explosion had finally reached it. It was at this point, when looking back, that some of them would claim surprise. You're there, and been all these years of let's short sheet Carrie's bed at Christian Youth Camp, and I found this love letter from Carrie to Flash Bobby Pickett. Let's copy it and pass it around and hide her underpants somewhere and put the snake in her shoe and duck her again and duck her again. Carrie tagging along stubbornly on biking trips trips known one year as Puddin' and the next year as Truck Face. Always smelling sweaty, not able to catch up. Catching poison ivy from urinating in the bushes. Everyone finding out that they scratch ass, your bum bitch. Billy Preston putting peanut butter in her hair. That time she fell asleep in study hall. The pinches, the legs outstretched in the school aisles to trip her up. The books knocked from her desk. The obscene postcard tucked into her purse. Carrie on the church picnic, kneeling down clumsily to pray, and the seam of her old madras skirt splitting along the zipper like the sound of a huge wind breakage. Carrie always missing the ball, even in kickball, falling on her face in modern dance during their sophomore year and chipping a tooth, running into the net during volleyball, wearing stockings that were always running, or about to run, always showing sweat stains under the arms of her blouses, even the time Chris Hergensen called up after school from the Kelly Fruit Company downtown and asked her if she knew the pig poop was spelled Karrie. Suddenly, all this and the critical mass was reached. The ultimate shit on, gross out, put down, long searched for, was found. Fission. She backed away, howling in the new silence, fat forearms across her face, a tampon stuck in the middle of her pubic hair. The girls watched her, their eyes shining solemnly. Carrie backed into the side of one of the 4 large shower compartments and slowly collapsed into a sitting position. Slow, helpless groans jerked out of her. Her eyes rolled with wet whiteness, like the eyes of a hog in the slaughter pen. Sue said slowly, hesitantly, "I think this must be the first time she ever—" That was when the door pumped open with a flat and hurried bang, and Miss Desjardins burst in to see what the matter was. From the shadow exploded. Both medical and psychological writers on the subject are in agreement that Carrie White's exceptionally late and traumatic commencement of the menstrual cycle might well have provided the trigger for her latent talent. It seems incredible that as late as 1979, Carrie knew nothing of the mature woman's monthly cycle. It is nearly incredible to believe that the girl's mother would permit her daughter to reach the age of nearly 17 without consulting the gynecologist concerning the daughter's failure to menstruate. Yet the facts are incontrovertible. When Carrie White realized she was bleeding from the vaginal opening, she had no idea of what was taking place. She was innocent of the entire concept of menstruation. One of the surviving classmates, Ruth Grogan, tells of entering the girls' locker room at Uwin High School the year before the events we are concerned with and seeing Carrie using a tampon to blot her lipstick with. At that time, Miss Grogan said, "What the hell are you up to?" Miss White replied, "Isn't this right?" Miss Grogan then replied, Sure it is." Ruth Grogan let a number of her girlfriends in on this. She later told this interviewer she thought it was sort of cute. And if anyone tried in the future to inform Carrie of the true purpose of what she was using she apparently dismissed the explanation as an attempt to pull her leg. This was a facet of her life, and she had become exceedingly wary of. When the girls were gone to their period 2 classes, and the bell had been silent, several of them had slipped quietly out the back door before Miss Desjardins could begin to take names. Miss Desjardins employed the standard tactic of hysterics. She slapped Carrie smartly across the face. She hardly would have admitted the pleasure the act gave her, and she certainly would have denied that she regarded Carrie as a fat, whiny bag of lard. A first-year teacher, she still believed that she thought all children were good. Carrie looked up at her dumbly, face still contorted, working. Miss Des. Ooh. Off to page 2. Page 3. Get up, Miss Desjardins, said dispassionately. Get up and tend to yourself. I'm bleeding to death, Carrie screamed, and one blind, searching hand came up and clutched Miss Desjardins' white shorts. It left a bloody handprint. The gym teacher's face contorted into a pucker of disgust. She suddenly came stumbling to her feet and get over there. Carrie stood swaying between the showers and the wall with its dime sanitary napkin dispenser slumped over. Pointing at the floor, her arms dangling limply, she looked like an ape. Her eyes were shiny and blank. Now, Miss Desjardins said with hissing, deadly emphasis, you take one of the napkins out. No, never mind. Never mind the coin slot. It's broken anyway. Take the one and... Damn it. Will you do it? You act as if you never had a period before. Period? Carrie said. Her expression of complete unbelief was too genuine, too full of dumb and hopeless horror to be ignored or denied. A terrible and black foreknowledge grew in Rita Desjardins' mind. It was incredible. It's incredible. Could not be. She herself had begun menstruation shortly after her 11th birthday and had gone to the head of the stairs to yell down excitedly, Hey, Mom! I'm on the rag. Carrie, she said now. She advanced toward the girl. Carrie? Carrie flinched away. At the same instant, a rack of softball bats in the corner fell over with a large echoing bang. They rolled every which way, making Desjardins jump. Carrie, is this your first period? But now that thought had been admitted, she hardly had to ask. The blood was dark and flowing with terrible heaviness. Both of Carrie's legs were smeared and splattered with it, as though she had waded through a river of blood. It hurts, Carrie groaned. My stomach. That passes, Miss Desjardins said. Pity and self-shame met in her and mixed uneasily. You have to stop the flow of blood. There was a bright flash overhead, followed by a flash gun-like pop, as a light bulb sizzled and went out. Miss Desjardins cried out with surprise, and it occurred to her the whole damn place is falling in, and that this kind of thing always seems to happen around Carrie when she was upset, and as if bad luck dogged her every step. The thought was gone almost as quickly as it had come. She took one of the sanitary napkins from the broken dispenser and unwrapped it. Look, she said, like this. From the shadow exploded. Carrie White's mother, Margaret White, gave birth to her daughter on September 21st, 1963. Under the circumstances which can only be termed bizarre. In fact, an overview of the Carrie White case leaves the careful student with one feeling ascendant over all others, that Carrie was the only issue of a family as odd as that has ever been brought to popular attention. As noted earlier, Ralph White died February of 1963. when a steel girder fell out of a carrying sling on a housing project job in Portland. Just a second. Hello? Hello? Oops. Sorry about that. At approximately 1:30 p.m. on September 21st, the neighbors on Carlin Street began to hear screams from the white bungalow. The police, however, were not summoned to the scene until after 6 p.m. We are left with two unappetizing alternatives to explain this time lag. Either Miss White's neighbors on the street did not wish to become involved in a police investigation, or dislike for her had become so strong that they deliberately adopted a wait-and-see attitude. Mrs. Georgia McLaughlin, the only one of the three remaining residents who were on the street at the time, who would talk to me, said that she did not call the police because she thought the screams had something to do with Holly Rowland. When the police did arrive, at 6:22 p.m., the screams had become irregular. Mrs. White found in her bed upstairs, and the investigating officer, Thomas G. Merton, at first thought she had been the victim of an assault. The bed was drenched with blood, and a butcher knife lay on the floor. It was only then that he saw the baby, still partly wrapped in a placental membrane, at Mrs. White's breast. She had apparently cut the umbilical cord herself with the knife. It staggers both imagination and belief to advance the hypothesis that Mrs. Margaret White did not know she was pregnant, or even understand what the word entails. And recent scholars such as J.W. Brankston and George Felding have made a more reasonable case for the hypothesis that the concept linked irrevocably in her mind with the sin of intercourse had been blocked entirely from her mind. She may simply have refused to believe that such a thing could happen to her. We have records of at least 3 letters to a friend in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that seem to prove conclusively that Mrs. White believed from the 5th month on that she had a cancer of womanly parts and would soon join her husband in heaven. When Miss Desjardins led Carrie up to the office 15 minutes later, the halls were mercifully empty. Classes droned onwards behind closed doors. Carrie's shrieks had finally ended, but she had continued to weep with steady regularity. Desjardins had finally placed the napkin herself, cleaned the girl up with paper towels, gotten her back into her plain cotton underpants. She tried twice to explain the commonplace reality of menstruation, but Carrie dropped her hands over her ears and continued to cry. Mr. Morton, the assistant principal, was out of his office in a flash when they entered. Billy DeLois and Henry Trennant, 2 boys waiting for the lecture due them for cutting French, I goggled around from their chairs. "Come in," Mr. Morton said briskly. "Come right in." He glared over Desjardins' shoulder at the boys, who were staring at the bloody handprint on her shorts. "What are you looking at?" This is getting good. All right. On to page 4. "Blood," Henry said, and smiled with a kind, vacuous surprise. "2 detention periods," Morton snapped. He glanced down at the bloody handprint and blinked. He closed at the door behind them and began pawing through the top drawer of his filing cabinet for a school accident form. "Are you all right?" Carrie Desjardins supplied. Carrie White, Mr. Morton had finally located an accident form. There was a large coffee stain on it. "You won't need that, Mr. Morton. I suppose it was a trampoline. I won't." "No. But I think Carrie should be allowed to go home for the rest of the day. She had a rather frightening experience." Her eyes flashed signal which he caught but could not interpret. "Yes, okay. If you say so. Good, fine." Morton crumpled the form back into the filing cabinet, slammed it shut with his thumb in the drawer, and grunted. He whirled gracefully to the door, yanked it open, and glared at Billy and Henry and called Mrs. Fish. "Could we have this dismissal slip here, please? Carrie Wright?" "Right," said Mrs. Desjardins. "White," Morton agreed. Billy DeLuise snickered. "Week's detention," Morton barked. A blood blister was forming under his thumbnail. "Hurt like hell." Carrie's steadily monotonous weeping went on and on. Mrs. Fish brought the yellow dismissal slip, and Morton scrawled his initials on it with his silver pocket pencil, wincing at the pressure of his wounded thumb. "Do you need a ride, Cassie?" he asked. "We can call a cab if you need one." She shook her head. He noticed with distaste the large bubble of green mucus had formed at one nostril. Morton looked over her head and at Miss Desjardins. I don't know. That kind of turns my stomach. I also feel sorry, but oh, there we are. "I'm sure she'll be all right," she said. "Carrie only has to go over to Carlin Street. The fresh air will do her good." Morton gave the girl the yellow slip. "You can go now, Cassie," he said magnanimously. "That's not my name," she screamed suddenly. Morton recoiled, and Miss Darden jumped as if struck from behind. The heavy ceramic ashtray on Morton's desk suddenly toppled to the rug as if to take cover with the force of her scream. Butts and flakes of Morton's pipe tobacco scattered on the pale green nylon rug. "Now listen," Morton said, trying to muster sternness. "I know you're upset, but that doesn't mean I'll stand for—" "Please," Mrs. Desjardins said quietly. Morton blinked at her and then nodded curtly. He tried to project the image of a lovable John Wayne figure while performing the disciplinary functions that were his main job as an assistant principal, but did not succeed very well. The administration usually representative of J.C. Supper's PTA functions, an American Legion, and ceremonies by Principal Henry Grail, usually learned him lovable Mort, The student body was more apt to term him that crazy ass jabber from the office, but as few students such as Billy DeLuise and Henry Trennant spoke at PTA functions or town meetings, the administration's view tended to carry the day. Now lovable Mort, while secretly nursing his jammed thumb, smiled at Carrie and said, "Go along then, if you like, Mrs. Wright, or would you like to sit a spell and just collect yourself?" "I'll go," she muttered, and swiped at her hair. She got up, then looked around at Mrs. Desjardins. Her eyes were wide open and dark with knowledge. "They laughed at me through things. They always laughed." Desjardins could only look at her helplessly. Carrie left. For a moment there was silence. Morton Desjardins watched her go. Then, with an awkward throat-clearing sound, Mr. Morton hunkered down carefully and began to sweep together the debris from the fallen ashtray. She sighed and looked at the drying maroon handprint on her shorts with distaste. She got her period, her first period, in the shower. Morton cleared his throat again, and his cheeks went pink. The sheet of paper he was sweeping with moved even faster. "Isn't she a bit old for her first?" "Yes, that's what made it so traumatic for her. Although I can't understand why her mother..." The thought trailed off, forgotten for the moment. "I don't think I handled it very well, Morty, but I didn't understand what was going on. She thought she was bleeding to death." He stared up sharply. "I don't believe she knew there was such a thing as a menstruation until half an hour ago." "I don't believe she knew. Hand me that little brush. Hand me the little brush there, Miss Desjardins." "Yes, that's it." She handed him a little brush with the legend "Chamberlain Hardware and Lumber Company never brushes you off" written up the handle. He began to brush his pile of ashes onto the paper. "There's still going to be some for the vacuum cleaner, I guess. This deep pile is miserable. I thought I set the ashtray back on the desk further. Funny how things fall over." He bumped his head on the desk and sat up abruptly. "It's hard for me to believe that a girl in this or any other high school could get through 3 years and still be alien to the fact of menstruation, Miss Desjardins. It's even more difficult for me," she said, "but it's all I can think of to explain her reaction. And she's always been a group scapegoat." He funneled the ashes and butts into the wastebasket and dusted his hands. "I've placed her, I think. Margaret White's daughter must be. That makes it a little easier to believe." He sat down behind the desk and smiled apologetically. "There's so many of them. After 5 years or so, they all start to merge into one group face. You call boys by their brothers' names. That type of thing. It's hard. Of course it is. Wait till you've been in the game 20 years like me," he said, looking down at his blood blister. "You get kids and look familiar and find out you had their daddy the year you started teaching. Margaret White was before my time, for which I am profoundly grateful. She told Mrs. Besant, God rest her, that the Lord was reserving a special burning seat in hell for her because she gave the kids an outline of Mr. Darwin's beliefs on evolution. She was suspended twice while she was here, once for beating a classmate with her purse. Legend has it that Margaret saw the classmate smoking a cigarette. Peculiar religious views, very peculiar. His John Wayne expression suddenly snapped down. The other girls, did they really laugh at her? Oh my goodness. I have to read one more page and then I'll stop. All right. One more. All right. Worse, they were yelling and throwing sanitary napkins at her when I walked in, throwing them like peanuts. Oh dear. John Wayne disappeared. Mr. Martin went scarlet. You have names? Yes, not all of them, although some of them may rat on the rest. Christine Hergensen appeared to be the ringleader, as usual. Chris and her Mortimer Snurds. Morton murmured. Yes, Tina Blake, Rachel Spies, Helen Shries, Donna Thibodeau, and her sister Fern, Leela Grace, Jessica Upshaw, and Sue Snell. She frowned. You wouldn't expect a trick like that from Sue. She's never seemed to be the type of this kind of a stunt. Did you talk to the girls involved? Miss Darden chuckled unhappily. I got them the hell out of there. I was too flustered, and Carrie was having hysterics. He steepled his fingers. Do you plan to talk to them? Yes, but she sounded reluctant. Do I detect a note of... You probably do, she said glumly. I'm giving in a glass house. See, I understand how those girls felt. The whole thing was just made me want to take the girl and shake her. Maybe there's some kind of instinct or about menstruation that makes women want to snarl. I don't know. I keep seeing Sue Snell and the way she looked. Mr. Morton repeated wisely. He did not understand women and had no urge at all to discuss menstruation. I'll talk to them tomorrow, she promised. Rip them down one side and up the other. Good. Make the punishment suit the crime. And if you feel you have to send any of them to me, feel free. I will, she said kindly. By the way, a light blew out while I was trying to calm her down. It added the final touch. I'll send a janitor right down, he promised, and thanks for doing your best, Mrs. Desjardins. Will you have Miss Fish send in Billy and Henry? Certainly. She left. He leaned back and let the whole business slide out of his mind when Billy DeLuise Henry Trinnet. My goodness. He leaned back and let the whole business slide out of his mind when Billy DeLuise and Henry Trinnet, class cutters extraordinaire, slunk in. He glared at them happily and prepared to talk tough. As he often told Hank Gale, he ate class cutters for lunch. Graffiti scratched on a desk in Chamberlain in junior high school. Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, but Carrie White eats shit. She walked down Ewan Avenue and crossed over to Carlin at the stoplight on the corner. Her head was down and she was trying to think of nothing. Cramps came and went in great gripping waves, making her slow down and speed up like a car with a carburetor trouble. She stared at the sidewalk, quartz glittering in the cement, hopscotch grids scratching ghostly rain-faded chalk, wads of gum stamped flat, pieces of tinfoil and penny candy wraps. They all hate. They never stop. They never get tired of it. A penny lodged in a crack. She kicked it. Imagine Chris Hergensen, all bloody and screaming for mercy, with rats crawling all over her face. Good, good. That would be good. A dog turd with a foot track in the middle of it. A roll of blackened caps that some kid had banged with a stone. Cigarette butts. Crash in her head with a rock, with a boulder. Crash in all their hearts. Good, good. That was good for Mama. All right for her. She didn't have to go among the wolves every day, every year, out into a carnival of laughters, joke tellers, pointers, snickerers. And didn't Mama say there would be a day of judgment? The name of that and an angel with a sword. If only be today, and Jesus coming, not with lamb and a shepherd's crook, but with a boulder on each hand to crush the laughters and snickers, to root out the evil and destroy it screaming, a terrible Jesus of blood and righteousness. And if only she could be his sword in his arm. She had tried to fit. She had defied Mama in 100 little ways, had tried to erase her red plague circle that had been drawn around her from the first day that she had left the controlled environment of the small house on Calvin Street and walked up to the Baker Street Grammar School with her Bible under her arm. She could still remember the day, the stairs, and the sudden awful silence when she had gotten down on her knees before lunch in the school cafeteria. The laughter had begun on that day and had echoed up through the years. The red plague circle was like blood itself, could scrub, and still it would be there, not erased, not clean. She had never gotten on her knees in public place again, although she had not told Mama that still the original memory remained with her, and with them she had fought Mama tooth nail over the Christian church camp, and had earned the memory, earned the money to go herself by taking in sewing. Mama told her darkly that it was a sin, that it was Methodists and Baptists and Congregationalists that was sin and backsliding. She forbade Carrie to swim at the camp. Yet although she had swum and had laughed when they ducked her until she couldn't get her breath anymore, and they kept doing it, and she got panicky and began to scream, and had tried to take part in the camp's activities, 1,000 practical jokes had been played on an old praying Carrie, and she had come home on the bus a week early, her eyes red and socketed from weeping, to be picked up by Mama at the station. And Mama had told her grimly that she should treasure the memory of her scourging as proof that Mama knew, that Mama was right, that the only hope of safety and salvation was inside the red circle. For straight is the gate, Mama said grimly in the taxi, and at home she sent Carrie to the closet for 6 hours. Mama had, of course, forbade her to shower with the other girls. Carrie had hidden her shower things in her school locker and had showered anyway, taking part in a naked ritual that was shameful and embarrassing to her in hopes that the circle around her might fade a little, just a little. So that's page 6. That's where I stopped there for the day. And here is just a little self-promotion for myself. Here we go. And that is my horror book, Vampire Juice. And this is a review I got on Goodreads. It is a young adult horror, occult fantasy book, if you like that sort of things. Just, if you like that sort of thing, check it out. My link is in the bio. Okay. Flip the camera around. And thanks for watching. Or listening, I should say.